Hey Jews, we're going to continue learning the book of Esther from Loaz, so we have a higher probability of understanding what we're reading there and how to understand how that relates to us at all in our reality, in our times, the time 5784, and Baruch Hashem, I'm so happy that I started learning Torah so that I could understand what's going on in my life and in reality. And my belief system is not shaken in any of the crazy events that we've been seeing in our times, which, like we said, is the end of time. Because I know, because I've now realigned my belief system with basing it on knowledge that is based in wisdom and understanding. And when we're reading in the book of Esther, like we did in the last video, that God at that time was unhappy. And so a whole bunch of accidents were happening to Jews and non-Jews alike. And in our timeline, in our times, 5785, the end times, I'm seeing a lot of accidents happen. Just the things, all the plane crashes, all the, the bridge that gave way today in South Korea. A lot of accidents are happening both in the land of Israel and outside of the land of Israel, to the Jews and to everybody else. So that to me seems same. And we know, says King Solomon, that nothing is new under the sun. Pretty much everything that's happened has already happened. It's like a closed system. There's only so many stories to be told, and all of them have been told before. And the ultimate story is in the Torah, the story of the Jews, because the author of that story is God, who created a reality with wisdom. So that's why I'm happy that I have daily intellectual interaction with the Torah. I am learning, I'm considering, I'm thinking, I'm pondering, I'm meditating on it day and night. What am I understanding? And Baruch Hashem, we have so much information from smarter people from the times gone by in different generations where their spiritual level was higher, that have explained that this deeper understanding to be had is when you understand with wisdom, you base your belief system on knowledge that's rooted in wisdom, then you have a faith. Everything that happens is reinforcing that. So when I read yesterday in the book of Esther, where Haman had his decree, and it looks very much like what's happening in our world right now, that God was unhappy and he caused a whole bunch of accidents to happen. Well, my faith in this information, the wisdom of God, and literally all of our lineage and our tradition as Jews tells me, it makes me have a level of comfort in the whole thing that's happening, this whole process. I have faith. I know that all of creation was created really literally just to get to the redemption. And this is the way the story has unfolded because of basically how the nation of Israel has interacted with reality and how tightly they kept our connection and the covenant with God. So that's my understanding. My understanding, I feel, is like, I understand what's happening, Baruch Hashem. I'm not confused about October 7th in any way. I'm not confused about the rise in anti-Semitism. Baruch Hashem, it makes sense to me based on what I'm understanding from the Torah. God doesn't like it when the Holy Land is like the world number 2 place for gay and LGBTQ rights. God doesn't like that. That's anti-God. So it makes sense to me, all the things that are happening in this period of time, the end times. So we continue to read. So we just read that Mordechai became aware of, and he had knowledge of what was going to happen with the decree from Haman and Ahasuerus, and they saw there that Ahasuerus and Haman were celebrating. So it was concerning. So he started mourning, and he started going to the king's gate wearing a sackcloth, which was not really allowed, because he wanted Ahasuerus to hear him basically screaming out loud in a bitter voice, because he wanted to have a discussion with Ahasuerus that might be able to win over the king. 4.3. In each and every land, wherever the king's word and decree reached, there was a great mourning amongst the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Sackcloth and ashes were worn by men, which is probably what we should have all done, and some people did, by the way, after October 7th, was take the opportunity to fast and repent and cry out to God. The Jews were in a panic. At least they were awakened enough to understand that they were in very serious danger. Not doing interpretive dances and not going to Eurovision singing Song of Songs, and not trying to put into law anti-Semitic laws against being anti-Semitic. Not trying to do that, but rather just trying to return to God. They understood the situation properly. So they hoped to escape the annihilation. The Jews were in a panic. Many went so far as to beg their neighbors to take them as slaves, hoping to escape annihilation. They thrust their children at their non-Jewish neighbors, pleading with them to adopt them. Okay, so strike just what I said about they understood the situation. No, the Jews, it takes a long time for us to understand the situation. Like we said, God sent 46 or 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses to warn them before the exile, and we just would not listen. Just can't listen. We think we know better. We'll interact with God how we want to. We'll be Jews just based on our own desire to be Jews in whatever way we feel like it. We want to do one meal for Shabbat. We'll do one meal. We want to do 2 meals because the rabbi told us it's okay to do 2 meals. We'll just do 2 meals. We'll just do whatever we want. God loves us. God will save us. God's not going to let anything happen. Where is God? Where was God on October 7th? I said I'd calm down, so... The Gentiles replied that the decree stated that any person harboring a Jew for any purpose whatsoever would be put to death by the sword. The Jews wandered around in utter hopelessness. Again, I mean, I might as well just be reading this about the Holocaust and probably maybe something upcoming. In their despair, many people recalled the Torah's words, "You shall sell yourselves to your enemies as slaves and maidservants, but no one shall buy you." Deuteronomy 28:6. Everything has already been written. Every day when they would read the proclamation issued by Haman and the king, they would realize that their days were numbered and that the end was growing closer. We're at the year 5785. This is maximum end time for reality as it is relayed to us in the unbroken chain of our lineage. And we know that there are end times and there are end time prophecies, which we should be learning day and night, day and night, day and night, trying to understand what's happening in our reality, because we should realize that the end is near. It's near. So at least they knew that. So they would realize that the proclamation issued by Haman and the king, and they realized that their days were numbered and that the end was growing closer. Here too, they found a dread prediction. Your life shall hang in doubt before you. You shall be afraid day and night, having no assurance that you will live. Deuteronomy 28:66. Although the Jews of Shushan knew that a death sentence had been handed down for them, they knew at least that it would not be carried out before Adar 13th. In his own capital, the king could preserve order. But at the more distant provinces, anti-Semitism was on the rise. And there was fear that the Gentiles would kill the Jews long before the time came. Persecutions were also mounting. In a number of cities, Jews were being murdered. Many Jews were already mourning their dead. There was a poetic justice here. The Jews had enjoyed themselves at Ahasuerus' feast for 6 days, remaining home only on the Sabbath, as discussed earlier. Now they were beset with 6 woes. 1, mourning. 2, fasting. 3, weeping. 4, wailing. 5, sackcloth. And 6, ashes. So it's poetic justice. Everything is beautifully set out before us. If we, at least there, they stayed home on the Sabbath. However, every single year when we celebrate the Zionist state of Israel with its anti-Torah laws on Independence Day, I feel like it's exactly the same thing happening. And even if it comes out on the Sabbath, no problem for the anti-Torah people, Israelis, that live in the Holy Land, thinking that God's patience with them is never going to run out. If they're even thinking about that. Normally, when people share a tragedy, it's easier to bear. One person can comfort another. But here sackcloth and ash were worn by all the multitude. Since no one would survive, there would be no consolation. Also in Isaiah, the end-time prophet, God tells us, who can even comfort you, nation of Israel? Usually people share the same sorrows, but if no one has shared the same sorrows as the nation of Israel throughout time, because we're different than every other nation. So the only thing that can comfort us is God. That's what God tells us in Isaiah. Only I can comfort my people. 4.4. Esther's servants' girls and attendants came and told her, and the queen was very troubled. She sent clothes for Mordecai to put on so that he would take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Esther's girls told her about the outcry in the city, as well as the fact that Mordecai was wearing sackcloth. At first, she did not believe it, but when her attendants came and told her the same story, she became extremely agitated. Esther quickly composed herself and sent clothing to Mordecai. She wanted him to come into the palace and discuss the matter with her personally. As queen, she could not meet him in the street. Furthermore, it could be dangerous for her to be seen with him at this time. If he came into the palace, he might even be able to gain an audience with the king and overturn the decree. Mordecai would not accept the clothing. He had made an oath that he would not remove his sackcloth until the people were safe. Although he might possibly help it if he took off his sackcloth, he preferred to wait for divine intervention. So yeah, you could go and seek the local king his help. He could have gone to Ahasuerus, but instead he put it all on the line for God. He was showing that he was putting all his faith in God. So Esther immediately understood how troubled Mordecai was. Even if he did not want to wear the clothing, he should have at least accepted it. How could he refuse clothes and have them sent back to the queen? The tragedy must have been so great that he couldn't even think of clothing. 4.5. Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's attendants who had been appointed to stand before her, and she instructed him to go to Mordecai and investigate what was happening and for what reason. Seeing Mordecai's terrible anguish, Esther sent Hathach to find out what was wrong. Hathach was none other than Daniel. The numerical value of Daniel was 95, the same as that of Haman. So Daniel changed his name. He was called Hathach because he had been cut off, Hathach, from his position of authority. He had been one of the main advisors of Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus, and he had final authority over the entire government. Knowing that he was a Jew and not disinterested in what was decreed against his people, the king had demoted him and had placed him at Esther's disposal. Esther sent one of her servants to Mordecai with the message, "Do not refuse to reply to the man that I am now sending you. Hathach is an important person, and I'm sending him to you to find out what is happening and why. Why are you wearing sackcloth and refusing to accept the clothes that I sent you? I understand that the Jews must be in some kind of terrible trouble, but why? Is it because they have denied the God who performed wonders for them at the Red Sea? Is it because they have violated the 10 Commandments?" Esther had a good reason for sending Hathach rather than one of her own servants. If the king's courtiers saw Esther's servant going back and forth between her and Mordecai, they might suspect some kind of plot. Since Hathach was officially one of the king's own advisors, his presence would not raise such suspicions. If Esther were hatching a secret plot, she would do everything in her power to keep it from the king's advisors. 4.6. Hathach went out to Mordecai to use the main street in front of the king's gate. Hathach did not go directly to Mordecai like a person carrying a message. He strolled around the main street as if he had business of his own. He did not actively seek out Mordecai, but made it appear as if he had encountered him by chance. He did not want the king's courtiers to realize that he had a special message for Mordecai. He spoke to Mordecai in a public place so as to avert suspicion. An important secret would normally not be discussed in the main street. Although many Jews were walking around in a state of shock, Hathach did not question them. He wanted information directly from Mordecai. He met with him publicly so that there would not be any suspicion of a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. 4.7. Mordecai told him all that had happened and about the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the royal treasury in order to exterminate the Jews. Mordecai recognized that Hathach was Jewish, and he told him everything. He explained that this was punishment because the Jews had enjoyed themselves at Ahasuerus' feast. He also related how he had asked 3 young children to recite their verses, and how each one had given him a message of hope. He explained how the king had refused to accept Haman's silver, but how Haman had spread a rumor that the king had accepted it to heighten the effect of the decree. Thinking that the king had accepted a bribe, no one would dare to investigate or try to intercede. Mordecai wrote an account of the entire matter, asking Esther to do everything possible to prevent the loss of so many innocent lives. Since hearing does not have the same impact as seeing, he also had Hathach copy the decree that had been circulated so that he would be able to send it to her. Although a decree issued by the king normally cannot be retracted, it was certainly an exceptional case. The Jews had been falsely accused, and when the king had sealed the decree, he had not known its full impact. If one could get to the king, there might be ample opportunity to explain to him that this decree must be annulled. In the meta story here, the Jews were actually being denounced before God for actually denounced before the king for keeping the Torah laws. So they were being falsely accused. We don't get denounced for following the laws. We get denounced for not following the laws. We have some sort of punishment, says God in the Megillat Esther, for bowing down to Nebuchadnezzar's idol, even though our hearts were not in it, even though our intention wasn't really to serve Nebuchadnezzar's idol. But the fact that we did bow down, the fact that we weren't fanatically committed to even the chashash, even the appearance of idol worship, we were still held liable. But what's happening in our time when people really are, with all their hearts and all their souls, serving different gods? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think can happen? What's your understanding of reality? Is that going to continue to go on? Just because it has been, we have not been punished for that up until now, doesn't mean that we won't be punished. We know that God is patient. God is kind. God does not want to annihilate his nation, the nation that's called by his name. He wants to give us hints. He wants to give us time. He wants to give us opportunities to repent and rectify the situation. And Baruch Hashem, people can also learn from other people's mistakes. When the time runs out, the time runs out. So 4.8, he gave Hathach a copy of the order to exterminate the Jews that had been circulated in Shushan, to show to Esther and to tell her about it, to instruct her to go to the king and to beg for mercy, pleading before him for her people. Mordecai also sent word at that time that the time had come for her to reveal her background to the king. His message said, "The time has now come. I am giving you permission to reveal to the king your people and your birthplace. You must realize that you too are included in the decree, since you are Jewish. You must now go to the king willingly, not under duress as before. In order to deliver the message to him, you must submit to all his demands willingly. Do not think that you are committing a sin. You are serving God in the highest possible way by saving your entire people." Do not wait until the king summons you. Make yourself beautiful and wear your best robes so that the king will notice you. You will have to find an opportunity to speak to the king in complete privacy, since Haman has agents throughout the palace. Plead before the king. First, beg for mercy for yourself, and then for your people. Once you have succeeded, speak to the king in Haman's presence. Once he knows who you are, he will not dare to speak against the Jews. If you do this, the Jews will truly be called your people. You will become very much like Moshe himself, who is called the shepherd of Israel because he risked his life for them. So again, in a previous video, about what we can learn from the Holocaust, which is many, many things, is that a leader of the Jews is somebody who is like a shepherd who would risk their life for them, not like somebody who is willing to escape the Holocaust by using the Nazis or the Nazis saving them and leaving all of his people behind to whatever. His merit must also protect them. 4.9, Hathach came and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Hathach related Mordecai's words to Esther. He explained that since they were in the street, they could not speak too openly, but Mordecai was able to provide sufficient hints for him to know the situation clearly. Hathach expanded upon Mordecai's words, telling Esther all about the Jews' terrible predicament. His words were very harsh. He urged the queen to take action. 4:10 and 11. Esther spoke to Hathach and instructed him to tell Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people in the king's lands know the law. Any man or woman who comes into the king in the inner court without being summoned will be killed without exception, unless the king stretches out the golden scepter to indicate that he should live. But I have not been summoned to come to the king now for 30 days. Esther gave an answer to Hathach explaining why she could not go into the king immediately. She instructed him to relate her words to Mordecai. Esther also instructed Mordecai not to do battle openly with Haman. Haman's hatred of the Jews was merely a reflection of Esav's hatred for Jacob, like we said. A lesson should therefore be taken from Jacob, Yaakov, who fled from Esav rather than doing battle with him. Why had Mordecai not hidden from Haman rather than angering him by not bowing down to him? Seeing Haman's power, why had Mordecai infuriated him by showing him the agreement that Haman would be Mordecai's slave? When the wicked are at advantage, one should not start up with them. Excuse me. Esther also instructed Mordecai not to allow others to see Hathach going back and forth with messages. If Haman were to find out about it, he would kill Hathach. Since Esther was sending word that she would not be able to do as Mordecai requested, Hathach refused to go. Esther had urged him and almost begged him to convey the message. Once he decided to go, however, he was a trusted messenger who was able to relate the message in the best possible manner. Esther only had to outline her reasons for refusing. He would be able to explain it fully to Mordecai. Esther also told Hathach that if Mordecai became angry and spoke harshly, he should be patient and not to insult him. Mordecai was in such agony that he was not completely responsible for his actions. Through Hathach, Esther explained to Mordecai that she could not present herself to the king right away for 3 reasons. First, if she attempted it, she would be seized and killed without any investigation whatsoever. This was the law of the Persians and the Medes. If a person was not summoned through Haman, he would be put to death. These were the standing orders that had been given to the palace guards. Unless the king stretched forth his golden scepter, the person would immediately be killed. This law had been promulgated by Haman so that Mordecai would not be able to obtain an audience with the king to plead for the Jews. The king had another reason for excluding Mordecai and other undesirables. He did not want to be pestered with petitions to rebuild the temple, because they don't want the temple to be rebuilt. But guess who does? The nation of Israel. The Jews want that. We want to build the temple. What's stopping us? Well, we're not following the Torah laws, and we're not even, for the most part, as a nation, all together serving God. But they didn't want to build the temple. So if a person entered the royal chamber without permission, he could not use ignorance as a defense. All the king's servants knew, and it was well publicized throughout the land of the empire. Even people in the farthest flung ends of the empire were aware of this rule. Second, if Esther were spared and the king stretched forth his royal scepter to her, she was not certain to overturn the decree. She might fail and also be demoted from her position. What gain would there be? She would not even be able to speak up for the Jews when a propitious time came. Third, there was still plenty of time and no need to hurry. If the danger were imminent, she would have to risk her life without a thought. But now there was ample time, and the opportune occasion might arise for her to speak to the king without endangering her life. Help might come from another source without such personal danger. If she burst in upon the king, her death would be certain. Her hope of helping the Jews was questionable. I'm certain, she said, that the king will summon me soon. It's been 30 days since he called for me, and he should do so any day now. Why should I take the initiative and endanger my life? There's still plenty of time. You might say that God will intervene. I'm not so sure. Things are going very poorly for me right now. The king has not called me for 30 days. He used to love me so much, but now he doesn't even want to see me. Why hurry? If we wait, the Jews will repent, and then God can let me save them without endangering my life. Better for me to wait until the king summons me. Let the Jews suffer. It will be an atonement for having enjoyed Ahasuerus's feast, meaning, as we know from the information, our understanding and knowledge, and our belief, is that the reason for some of the suffering that we do here is so it will atone for the sins that we have done when we break the Torah laws. So after we die, chas v'shalom, we go to hell, or we get punished in a more spiritual way after we die. We want everything to be good for us after we die, including our death. So 4:12, they told Mordecai what Esther had said. From the plural form, it was obvious that people other than Hathach conveyed Esther's message. When Hathach saw that Esther was not obeying Mordecai, he was ashamed to bring him the message. Some say that Haman noticed that Hathach was giving frequent meetings with Mordecai. He suspected that the two were conspiring to overturn the decree against the Jews. Haman did not know that Esther was Jewish, but he knew that she had grown up in Mordecai's house and was probably sympathetic towards the Jews. Even if she could not save all the Jews, she might try to save Mordecai, who was Haman's arch enemy. In order to prevent communication between Esther and Mordecai, Haman had Hathach killed. This was not enough to deter Esther. She found other trusted messengers. Meanwhile, Daniel's death at Haman's hand was an atonement for Israel. Whenever a great saint dies and is properly mourned, God forgives his people. Let's meditate on that day and night for a while.